So let's call the meeting for November, the planning board meeting for November to order. The first item on the agenda would be the meeting minutes from October. Did anybody have any comments on that? Corrections? So if there's no corrections, I move that we accept the meeting minutes as written.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, for old business, the status of the final conservation ordinance, it was presented to the select board Monday. Were you there, Marcia?
Yes, I was there, and I was there. It was presented as something with minimal corrections, which is true with the exception of the watershed definition. And no one had any comments, and it was voted on to place on the warrant. And so at the next select board meeting, they will actually review the warrant, and I believe North Star prepared the warrant article for this.
Yeah,
um,
just getting ready to prepare the exhibits to send.
Right, and it's going to be, rather than breaking it down to all the individual, rather than break it down to all the individual sections, there's going to be one article approved for the entire ordinance. Jim, did you want to add something?
Oh, no.
And
And so the timeline is that there are 2 public hearings coming up. I plan to be at them, but I guess this is where the public would really parse the ordinance. And so as many people that can be there as possible would be helpful. So it's December 11th and December 18th. And the special town meeting is January 22nd. One of the citizens, Heidi Richards, did make some other recommendations, which we tabled because it has to do with the definitions of dwelling units. And we're going to tackle that in the upcoming year as we deal with LD 2003. Thank you. So, that's all I have to say.
I have a question. Do we want to have like a PowerPoint presentation similar to what we did at the voting on the budget meeting? You know, a quick 5 or 10 minute kind of intro to what the thing is at these public hearings?
that's actually something that I had on my list as a question too. I haven't been to a special town or to a public meeting for something like this, so I'm not too sure how that would work, but I would assume that we would present the idea of the ordinance to whoever happened to be there. So I think we should plan on doing that, having a PowerPoint, and have somebody speak to the ordinance, whether it's Matt or Ryan, if you've done that already. But I think we should plan on doing that for sure.
I think between Orion and Matt, maybe you could look at your schedules and see if that's something you can take on.
Yeah, I mean, I agree though with what you said earlier is having as many of us there as possible is always good for backup. I don't mind doing, helping out with the presentation, but having Matt or Marcy or Todd there as well or any of us there to clarify if there's questions.
I will ask John if we could have a few minutes at each hearing.
Go ahead. Yeah, we have a question, comment?
It's appropriate for me to speak.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I probably should give my name and
Yes.
Steve Grooverman, 847 Elmwood Road. And I think the PowerPoint is a great idea, and if you could even post it on the town website in advance, that way people, because I think regular citizens are probably going to be unlikely to want to wade through the whole ordinance, but a PowerPoint would be more manageable, and doing it in advance would allow people to have questions ready. Thank you.
Absolutely. I agree with that comment. I mean, we have the PowerPoint slides that we presented already on the website, but they're not necessarily easily accessible. And one thing we talked about doing was to create like a little YouTube video of talking through the PowerPoint for people who want to look at it before the meeting and prepare questions. That could be helpful as well.
Steve, did you sign in so that we know you attended? Is there a sign up sheet? Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Excuse me, what time are the public hearings on those dates? Do you know?
6 p.m.
6?
So Becky Taylor Chase, Town Administrator, Town Clerk, and a few other titles here in Powell. So it'll be 6 p.m. It always opens up with the first public hearing for the land use ordinances for the planning board. Then we close that public hearing and then we go into the select board public hearing of the warrant. So for a presentation, it would make sense to, when we're looking at Article 2, because that's the article placement for yours, to have the presentation right then. And you could even use this equipment to record sort of a PSA, because that's part of the outreach with this equipment as well, that we could put directly up onto the YouTube page. I'm creating sections in the page that are specifically for planning board, so we could put it right under there and make it accessible to people and link it back into the public hearing calendar notices on the website as well. So that's really basically, and then we will sign the warrant, the first meeting in January that the select board has, and then the special town meeting happens on the 22nd at 7 p.m. in this room.
So could we come by at some time between now and the public hearing to record?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you want to use your own, as long as it's on a thumb drive in an MP4 format, I can upload it as well. But, you know, where this equipment, just using it, you could actually do something with the shared screen that way too. And I can try to help you. I do have a new staff member starting on Monday, so I'll be pretty much downstairs focused on that, but I will try to help in between of management of the equipment so that you can get that recorded the way you need it to be.
I actually have a first go of a recording and can share it. I just need to update the dates of the public hearings. I think I mentioned the old dates, so I have editing equipment, so I can edit in the
Okay.
new dates. And I can share with folks if they think it's good enough, we can post it. If we want to do more with it, then we can kick the tires on it and do some more stuff with it.
Yeah, Ryan, if you want to share that with us and then we can go from there, that's awesome. If it's already done, it's easy. So that was my next question, is what we needed to prepare for the public meeting, but I think we kind of have that.
I believe North Star has prepared what we've all seen, which is the entire ordinance with red line. And we're not going to be printing out the whole ordinance, but it will be available on the website and in electronic form for our presentation at the. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Sam.
So I've been working on, just consolidating the ordinance into the sections that are gonna be affected by the changes. So that would get printed out. It's, I don't know how many pages, 30-something pages, but the whole ordinance would be on the town website.
Becky, did you say we don't have to print out anything over 10 pages?
That's correct. State statute says if the exhibit is more than 10 pages, that we aren't required to print it, but we could have a digital copy. So that was when I reached out to Sam to see if we could at least isolate the sections so we could then print those to have with the warrant. So she's going to work on that and have it before the next select board meeting, so they have the full packet when they're reviewing the draft warrants.
Would we be printing the red line version or just the updated version? I suppose it'd be less pages if we didn't do the red line version of it.
I think we have to do the red line. Otherwise, people won't know what was changed.
Okay, so, are we all set? So we're gonna, the public hearing will be before our next planning board meeting. So, sounds like between the YouTube and, Sam, we should be good to go for that,
And I'll check with John to make sure we can have a few minutes
right?
in advance of the vote.
Okay. The next item under old business that I added was the real estate form for the proposed purchase of town-owned property.
Just a little background. There are two pieces of town-owned property and I have maps here that show where they are. The town hasn't really sold property in the past, but there's a policy. And we received, the select board received two requests for purchase of town property. And all of the various boards and committees are asked to comment on whether they agree or disagree with moving forward. And there is a section for comments. Once the select board has accumulated all those comments, which is December 11th, I think it's the 11th, they will meet to decide if they want to put the sale of the town properties on the warrant for the regular town meeting in June. So originally I thought this was going to happen at the special town meeting, so I thought there was more urgency than there is. So at this point, we're asked to comment, and the applicant has mentioned mobile home park as a possibility for the use of these properties. So that's why I think I had added to the agenda review of those regulations. But I think the first step is for us to, the form is very simple. I think it was sent around. It's basically, we have no objection or object to the sale of the property. So that's, I think, what we as a board need to vote on and add comments. And Matt had actually had a few comments he wanted to add. And I'll pass these, maybe I'll pass them this way first. Sorry. And hand you the right one. This. Nope. This is the map and in yellow. And I don't think I made that. My phone was on.
Yeah, yes.
I'm gonna read what Matt said. Matt said, first he says it's best to take a vote. And his personal view is, one, the select board should hold public hearings on an item of this level of importance, which will be done because there will be public hearings before the special town meeting. If the town is going to sell the property for use as a mobile home park, it should do so with a significant restrictions on how the property is used, maintained so as to minimize the impact on the surrounding area of a sudden increase in the number of residences. I'm not against the development, particularly given the housing crisis, but if it's done, it should be done very carefully.
Is this like a mobile home park? How does this relate to a subdivision?
So this is, I think, we're just, at this point, we're just saying whether we, what was the exact phrasing?
We object or,
Yeah, it's just
or-
basically asking if we object to the sale of town property as a board of the
Yeah.
town.
Yeah.
So if it really doesn't have anything to do with what, I mean, I suppose it has something to do with what they plan to use it for.
Well, I'm just in relation to Matt's comment, his comment was like about how the land is used or, and how it relates to other land. And that's why, like, the point of the conservation subdivision ordinance, part of it was if you have multiple units going into a piece of land, we want to have buffers and these things. So my question is like, what is the mobile home park and how is it similar, different than a conservation subdivision away if you're putting in multiple units?
so I think, I mean, if you read the mobile home, there are only a couple places in town where mobile homes are supposedly permitted according to the zoning regulations. The zoning and the regulations pertaining to mobile homes, have to still go through the subdivision ordinances. Now, if it's 5 mobile homes, is it now a conservation subdivision? I don't know the answer to that, but they have to go through the subdivision ordinances, and then there are other additional requirements that Todd has summarized. They have to do with the septic systems and so on. So I'm personally think, without going too far ahead of the game, just saying we expect the proponent, if the sale goes through, to meet with the town planner and review all relevant ordinances before proceeding something along that line.
Todd? In answer to your question, although it's probably premature to talk about it, it's hugely different than conservation subdivision, hugely different. Criteria, review standards, be subject to site plan review, as well as the section that deals with mobile home parks. The criterion in the mobile home parks is much different dimensionally than it is with the new ordinance that's being proposed. So I would have to use the word hugely different with a capital H. Yeah. So when and if we ever approach that type of a use, we'll probably need to take, and it may be advantageous to begin to look at the ordinances to see where they're conflictual, that being in site plan review, mobile home development, and the intent to try to do things more with a conservation mind.
So I'd have to say it's the discussion, even with Matt's comments, is almost putting the cart before the horse. Really, what we're talking about is, regardless of the outcome, the town is talking about selling off a significant chunk of land. And it's that they're asking us to either object, say we object to the sale, or not object. I think it's that simple to me when I read the form. It's not asking us if we care about what they are planning on doing with it. As a board, I don't like if I have my personal, we're not going to take comments right now at this stage. We need to make this decision as a board, so we're just gonna hash this out. Okay. So as a board, we need to, do we have enough to say that we object to the sale? With my, just as a resident, I would say, yes, I object, but as the chair of the planning board, do I really have an objection to town selling land? I'm not sure. So I'd like to, on that fact alone, what are people's thoughts?
Just a little bit of clarification. You said that the town is talking about selling. Isn't it really someone has asked to purchase, but we really aren't talking about selling it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
An individual is asking the town to sell them the land. That's, as far as my understanding is,
Okay.
that's all that's happening.
Okay.
And so this is the start of that process.
Yep.
And I think, Orion, did you go through this process?
I went through a process where, yeah, there was like a 1/2 acre parcel of land and I put in a request to buy this 1/2 acre parcel land next to my parcel to make it more of a conforming parcel. And yeah, we, when we went to the planning, we went to a town meeting and there was discussion and some people said the town should never sell town land, but then the people ended up voting to let me have that 1/2 acre, which I appreciated. So it was an interesting process. I thank you, Todd, for bringing us back to base. I mean, my perspective on this specific thing we're being asked to tonight is that, unless there's something explicit in the comprehensive plan or in the ordinance that says that we can point to of why we would possibly be against it, then we should say that we have no objections to it. On another note, just realizing for the people tuning in, maybe we should introduce ourselves so that people watching know who we are. I'm Orion Breen. I live on Elmwood Road. I'm on the planning board.
A very good point, Orion. I'm Todd Mellon. I am the vice chair today. I'm acting chair. I live on Merrill Road.
I'm Marcia Bowen. I'm the secretary, of the planning board.
I'm Mercedes Poor. I am the alternate and I live on Lawrence Road.
I'm Sam Picus. I'm with North Star Planning.
My name's Tom Mersha. I'm the new town planner.
There we go. Yep, Bill Schmidt. I'm an alternate, Poland Range Road.
Allison Purrington, recording secretary.
So I can't, getting back to the topic, I can't really argue with Orion's point. Did anybody else have any other comments about an objection to
Yep.
town selling?
Yes, I've got a couple of comments regarding the objecting selling. If we were, if we were ever even going to consider selling it, I would instead consider making the land a conservation area for everybody to use and never to be sold. Also, I would consider keeping that land for the future facilities committee to also look into. I'm sure they'll have comment also that maybe that's where they do a fire station, who knows, well, what else may be built. And also for future school, those are just three things that come that I would want to see that property go anywhere for a while.
Right, I agree with that wholeheartedly, those ideas. But I'm wondering as a board, if we have, from a planning board standpoint, because we have to write down why we object to the sale. Do we have an objection from a planning board standpoint for the sale of town land? I can only say that with the conservation subdivision going forward, we're trying to preserve open space and a mobile home park. if that's where this is going, maybe that's not, the goal, but, I'm thinking that, it's hard to say that. That's why you have to take off your personal hat and look at it from a planning board perspective.
From a pure planning perspective, I'd say planning for the future facilities, whatever it may or may not be, or planning for any future school use.
Todd, can I ask a point of clarification? It's with the delay and when we need this, because I did not realize we had to provide comment tonight. I thought we were reviewing the ordinance tonight. Is this something we have to decide tonight, or can this be something we talk about tonight and actually decide in December? Can you just give me timing? Like, does the select board need this month? They do.
December 11th is getting sent back to the select board.
Awesome. And did we object to the last sale that was down in the Layton, Lawrence area?
No, for the same reason.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm just, and we didn't, and did we object to the sale on Wood?
No.
No, I mean, this is, from my perspective, somewhat of a formality. I mean, this is just the very start of the process. And if it went through all the processes, this would still come before the entire town to vote to allow the sale. So this is strictly from planning board perspective, as I said earlier, unless there is a specific good reason, my opinion is, we kind of are obliged to say that there's not, that we don't have any objections at this point in time, and it should proceed through the process. And as more information comes to light, there'll potentially be plenty of things for the general public and even the planning board to comment on and even have objections to. But at this point, this is just like saying, proceed with the normal process.
I understand Bill's comment, and as part of the comprehensive plan, we do want to have preserve open space. I'm not sure that whether that's part of our planning board charge or not. I mean,
So I propose that we submit that we don't object to the sale. The planning board has no objection to the sale of town land, even though none of us really like that idea.
No.
Which is different.
Well, if we don't object, that means that we are almost not, that we don't have an opinion as a group. But we are supposed to plan for future facilities, open space. I mean, if once this land is gone, it doesn't come back.
So again, I think you're thinking, like, that's my thought as well. Like, as a resident, that's the way I think. What I've learned being on the planning board is that we are a rules-based board. We have rules in front of us that our job is to follow those rules. And I don't see any ordinance that would make us object to the sale. So even though we don't maybe personally like the idea of it, there's nothing within the ordinances that would force us to object to the sale. It's a perfectly legitimate sale if the town wants to go forward with it. I think the ideas that you're presenting as a person, you have that right to go before the select board and talk about that aspect when it comes up. And those are definitely legitimate concerns. And, I'll probably be voicing my opinion on that as well as a resident of the town.
I haven't read the charter yet, which is definitely my fault. I haven't read it, but I think that part of our job is to plan for things that we may envision in the future, whether it's from the comprehensive plan or, again, back to future facilities, like I could see someone say, well, why didn't the planning board realize that we may need land someday? Is that part of our charter, is actually to understand what we may need to be planning for? No?
We're called the planning board, but really we are more almost an adjudicatory board where people present projects and we look at the ordinance and we say, does it follow or does it not? The planning board, the actual planning piece of it, we have been doing, which is a long process in terms of what we've been doing with the conservation subdivision, where we're looking at the existing rules, we're getting feedback from the community, and we go through a long process of attempting to reword and rework the rules to better reflect the needs of the community based upon community feedback. That piece is the planning piece in a way, but in most, and that's a very long process, but in most situations, we don't really do like the planning of saying this should go here and this should go there and this shouldn't go here. We just try to look at the rules and be fair judges based upon what's written on the rules.
Okay, thank you.
I would hope that the Future Facilities Committee, the Capital Projects Committee, all those committees would weigh in and say, you can't sell it because we're thinking about putting a building there. So I think that's where this process would be valuable for them.
So I'll go back and propose that we say that we do not have an objection on this.
I'd really like to speak because I think you're basing this on some incorrect information.
Sure, go ahead.
Steve Grooverman, Elmwood Road. I believe that it's not purely the sale of the land, it's the land for the purpose stated. So, and my understanding from following this conversation is you're just saying whether you object or not to the sale of land. But I think that you're being asked to comment on the sale of land for the use proposed by the request for purchase.
So it's simply a proposed use. If the sale goes through, I don't think it's just a proposed use. They're saying that that's what they're thinking they want to use it for, but that's not necessarily what the outcome is going to be. So I don't see how we can vote on a proposed use, number one. Number two.
Then why is it on the request?
Well, that's what they're proposing to use it for.
I believe that zone says that is an accepted use. If they were saying, we want to have a llama farm in this zone use, and that wasn't in the zone, then we would have a comment to say that's not in the zone. If it's in the ordinance that that's an acceptable use, it doesn't mean it's actually going to get built. They'd still have to go through the planning process and town feedback. But like that, if that could be an objection that we would have if it was not in the ordinance, that use that they propose. But if that area is zoned for that use, we don't really have a comment besides that that's what the zoning ordinance says is an acceptable use at this time.
So that's all the planning board for is to whether it's zoned or not?
Pretty much.
Okay,
That's correct.
okay.
And it is, that area is zoned for mobile homes. So that's our job, is to simply follow the zoning. If you don't approve of the actual ordinances, that's a totally different thing. And that would be a different project altogether to change the zoning ordinances, which is what we've been doing for the last 6 months with the major subdivision ordinance. So
Okay.
we're just
And
followers.
this did not come up in your discussion, but I believe the Conservation Commission is pretty close to proposing a conservation easement for, at least for the Elmwood Road property. So just,
I'm aware of that.
okay,
Well,
it wasn't,
but it's just.
it's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant. You have to look at like I've been saying, we're taking what we really think as individuals, we got to take that hat off and
Okay.
look at what our role is as the planning board.
Okay.
It's zoned for that use. That's what they're requesting, to use that property
Mhm.
for. It falls within the rules that we have before us as the planning board. So I don't see how we can object to it as a planning board.
Okay. Thank you.
Feel certain that probably the Conservation Commission will be having a very different response to this. And just to assuage your concerns, it would, even if they bought the property, it would be a long and detailed process to even build a mobile home there if they ever got through. There's a lot of restrictions, so this is only like the first baby step to even considering the property.
So is there a mechanism, probably not for the planning board, but somewhere along this process to inform the potential purchaser of all this stuff?
That would be a job perhaps for the town planner. He should be having a discussion with the town planner. I would assume that's.
Since I hear the word plan in there, I would assume the planning board would be involved with that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would be happy to meet with the applicant, but there's a process to be followed. And the process that's established by this town is that comments from the boards, the commissions are brought to the board to the select board. The select board reviews those comments and then they make a decision. In fairness to the applicant, I can recite virtually everything that the full board has said, but it won't get the applicant to first base because the process calls for that applicant purchasing a public piece of land. Until that happens, we can recite chapter and verse, but I'm not sure it would be helpful. But I would be more than happy to help any of our citizens that have a complicated question about the steps they have to go through. It's part of the job, and it's part of helping the planning board.
I suppose then if the applicant doesn't ask, then the onus is
Well,
on them.
Not to further complicate the conversation, but there are other applicants looking at other pieces of public land for other types of uses other than this use that are of very large scale.
Mhm.
I'm having the preliminary conversations, but also saying the same thing, that
Okay,
the process requires you to go through getting the comments, asking, filling out that form that you have before you, and having feedback, and then to the select board. Yeah,
so
but we're always there to help the citizens, so it's.
part of the reason I'm here tonight is my concern about this particular issue. But part of it is I'm using it as an opportunity to learn more about how the town works. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. We welcome you. So, okay, all in favor?
Do we want to add a comment saying just that the planning board encourages anyone with interest in land to familiarize themselves with the ordinances and planning process and costs so that they don't end up in a situation that they are not happy about in the future after purchasing a piece of land.
We paraphrase that and I'll write it down.
Okay, so all in favor of the motion? Did we say yes? Did we all vote? Yes, okay. All right,
I think that we were in the point of
yeah.
discussion of the motion. And do we need to amend the motion to
Yeah. We'll leave yes.
Do Bill and I vote tonight because we have 2 vacancies? Because, Brian, because you should have a quorum, so we don't vote? Okay,
Three is a
okay,
quorum.
I just want to make sure. But yeah, that's why I was, yeah, thank you, I just want to clarify.
All right,
So I will provide you with the form to sign as chair.
right, okay. Moving on to, new business. We're asked to give the town something for the newsletter. Just a couple paragraphs or,
I thought I could just write that about the conservation ordinance and the public hearings and encourage people to come to the special town meeting. I don't know if we're doing anything else earth shattering that needs to be in the newsletter.
okay. I don't, not that I know of. You don't mind writing that up? Perfect, thank you. And then you had the Board of Appeals meeting.
Right. There, I just wanted to tell people there's a Board of Appeals meeting on November 30th. For a variance for a 33-acre parcel in the Pownell Pines plan. I don't know what that is. I think it's just a building permit for one resident, so maybe I would ask Jenny to speak, but I know you don't want to speak.
Jennifer Getting, Code Enforcement, Town of Pownell. So you're referring to the piece of property that's gonna be in November 30th, correct? I'm not definite on what parcel that is. But I do know, I'm like off the top of my head, I don't. I do know that it is something that where they're asking, I believe, for a variance as with a switch of an easement. So they'd like a variance for an easement for the town or something to that effect. But there's many questions, I believe, that has to come up at that Board of Appeals meeting before.
Is this pertain to anything the planning board should be part of? Do you know? I have the map here, but
Not that I'm aware of at this time. I know there was some conversation of where, because it came here first. And then it went to the select board and then went to it came via email. Maybe about a month and a half ago. So
if we ever had it on our agenda, but it talks about the Pownell Pines plan.
yeah,
What is that?
I'm not definite. I haven't seen that yet. I hadn't heard about that piece of it yet.
Okay.
Okay. But I do know that it's gonna be on the 30th and the appeals board, it went from here via email to the select board to the appeals board, and they're gonna be meeting on November 30th to meet with that gentleman. Okay,
So is it an appeal on a decision that we had made?
I don't ever remember making a decision. His name is Kenny.
Go ahead.
Since I took the notes for the select board meeting when he came before, so in the 80s, okay, in the 80s, the owner of the land came before the planning board to subdivide into 3 or 4 lots in the front. And when he did that, the additional acreage in the back doesn't have 300 feet of road frontage anymore. And then the planning board approved that split back in the 80s. Now they're coming before, because I believe he's looking for a variance for a building permit because there's no road frontage, and there was talk about putting some of the land in easement as well. More details will obviously come out more on November 30th, but that was a sort of a summary of Mr. Marchand's comments when he came before the board, which was probably the end of September, beginning of October. The minutes are online as well. That was not a recorded meeting.
Marshall.
Correct. Yep, correct.
Thank you, Becky. So that's not anything that we need to worry about at this time then? Okay, good. Why don't we go over the 2024 schedule?
The schedule is based on the same as last year's schedule with a submittal date 28 days before the meeting for a new project, and send it over here. Then any existing project is 2 weeks before with a footnote that says we reserve the right to limit discussion to one new and one existing project. So if this is approved, I can send it to everyone. I can send it to Becky to post on the website.
I have one question about the June 16th date,
Mhm.
and it's saying that's a holiday and town office closed, but we're still able to access the town office to have a meeting, or?
I guess it depends on whether we want to actually meet on a holiday to begin with.
What is the holiday?
But I do have a key.
Oh,
I think it falls on the, yeah, right. And would you have an objection if we decide to meet on that date for me to just use the key?
Not at all. You can meet.
Why don't we plan on meeting on the 19th, and if something comes up and we want to change that, we can always make that change.
I also am gonna pass out the latest on paper. Maybe guys don't want paper, but here it is. Paper are the names, titles, phone numbers, and email addresses. I think I have enough copies. So these over. If we have another, we'll send another to Sam. Tom and I talked a little bit about having a way to just access your email on the website, but I think all the emails really should go through the planning board email so that you don't get inundated with
Mhm.
a billion emails.
Yeah, I agree with that.
and just to clarify for the public, there's rules around, information and discussion between planning board members, and we try to have all communications be able to be accessible to the public upon demand if there's a FOIA request. And so we do encourage you to go to the website and email the planning board if you have a question, as well as your select board as well.
Thank you. I don't see any issues with the dates. Does anybody else see any problems with that? No. So Marcian thought it might be a good idea to just review the mobile home ordinance, and I don't think that's a bad idea. We're done fairly quickly, and so just taking a few minutes to go over our zoning ordinances in general is probably never a bad idea. So I don't know if anybody had a chance to look over things, but I did just kind of quickly go through the section 600, 604, the mobile home ordinance. And I just picked out a few things that I thought were important, interesting things that we need to keep in mind as a planning board if and when any mobile home park comes before us, because it is definitely a much different ordinance than we had seen previously. So number one, a mobile home park will be reviewed under section 900 and site review section 800. So the requirements that a mobile home park would have to fulfill would be the same as a subdivision. as far as maps and the steps in the planning process. So that really wouldn't change. There are some additional requirements that, and anybody feel free to jump in as I'm just kind of reviewing this. Like I said, this is just my thoughts, the things that I picked out. So the things that we've already looked at in section 900 and section 800 would still apply. And then in addition, there's a requirement for groundwater impact of waste disposal. We're looking at a lot of houses in a relatively small area. So there's a section of the ordinance that's focused on the effect of the wastewater on groundwater, and the type of waste disposal system that would be used, which we've talked a little bit about even in the conservation ordinance. There's a provision for traffic estimates, and also a legal document that would restrict sale of individual sites within the mobile home park. So I don't really know too much about mobile home parks, but from my research, it's basically one person or company owns the property and rents out individual sites. The owners will either own or rent each individual mobile home. So they don't own the property, and it stays, even though there's multiple homes, it stays as a single property throughout the lifetime of the mobile home park. The second section, section B, lot sizes depend on the type of wastewater disposal system. And density was capped at 20,000. So it's a lot of 20,000 square feet. There is a provision depending on the type of waste disposal system, they could get that down to 15,000, but it's still capped at 20,000 per 20,000 square feet per mobile home. So there would be a significant number of homes that they would be able to put on a single lot. Excuse me, even though the lots are smaller, anything that's adjacent to a public road would be required to have the same setbacks that a regular house would have. And also none of the mobile home lots would be allowed to exit from their lot to a main road. So we wouldn't have multiple driveways along a road. There'd just be a single or double entrance into the mobile home park. And the other thing that I thought was significant is that there is a 50-foot wide buffer around the entire park. And the first 25 feet of that 50 feet, they're required to actually put in a buffer of some kind. Trees, planted trees, a fence, something along those lines. Those were kind of the key points that I picked out that we would want to keep in mind when something like this came forward. I don't know if anybody else had any thoughts on this.
I think it's just good to know that there are specific ordinances that are fairly complex. I mean, we haven't done this before, but they're also, I think, pretty stringent. They're probably based on some model ordinance, but I think that's all good. If we have to go down this road, that pretty strict requirements.
I agree.
I just had a question about some of the language. For example, section 4, legal documents, and some of this may be as part of the other ordinances, like this mobile home ordinance doesn't say anything about a road maintenance agreement. Is that because it would be covered under some other private road agreement, perhaps, since this would be a private road? I mean, for our road, we have our own private road, so I had to have a road maintenance agreement. I would assume that they would have to too, but does it have to be included in this ordinance, or is it just covered by the?
I think it's different because this is owned by, it's not, it's a single property. So the owner of the mobile home park would be responsible for maintaining the road, is the way I read the ordinance. So they're responsible for maintaining the buildings and the public, well, not the public, but any buildings that are on the property, as well as any roads on the property.
And how are the details regarding how they maintain it? For example, the snow removal requirements and the road repair fund bonding, et cetera. Is that the details that we need to be aware of, or should we consider editing some of this ordinance? I know that would have to go to the town for approval as well.
Page 65, there's language of that under section C2, road design, circulation, traffic. Says, the road network shall provide for vehicular and pedestrian safety, emergency access, delivery, collection service, and snow storage. Streets shall be designed by a professional engineer. Yeah, I think,
That would probably come to us for review anyway, wouldn't that?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So, page 8, parking lanes is again, it's a little vague. It said each unit should have 2 parking spots. But it doesn't say where are they? Are they going to be in front of the unit, or is it a remote parking lot and you walk to it, or is it? Are we at liberty to actually require them to have 2 spots right in front of their unit?
I thought I read that they did require 2 at the unit.
On page 8, I didn't see any more details. I inferred that it probably would be at the unit, but if it's not written, I could see somebody saying, well, your parking spot is way over there.
Yeah, so I guess under number 3A, for each mobile home lot, there shall be provided and maintained at least 2 off-street parking spaces. I think you could make the assumption that that's attached directly, but you're exactly right. It doesn't say that explicitly. But that's, I think, part of what we can do as a planning board when they're coming before us, that we would say that that's either a requirement that we would want or not, I suppose.
But playing the devil's advocate, if I'm the developer and I want a remote parking lot, can you tell me no? It's not in the ordinance. Just a question for us to, as we review it.
It's a fair question.
Yeah.
And that's some of the problem with ordinances and
Yeah.
the way that they're written. Go ahead.
Both Sam and I have responses to the questions that are coming up. You know, site planning can either be creative or it can be complicated or both. And that's why you have planners like Sam and myself to analyze the site plan when it comes in a pre-application state. The way these standards are currently written, it makes it more complicated because there's a lack of clarity in some of the standards. On parking, for example, one of the first things, because it takes up so much space on a large scale project, the power of negotiation, although not written in the ordinance, is important to work with the applicant to say, you know, the standardized 2 spaces per unit, maybe it's better to have a collective location for them. Because we always have to go back to fire suppression. And how do you fight a fire in a very dense, any type of project? So that's just one of a multitude of planning design issues that are worked out in the early stage. And so given that I'm on board now, if any type of application comes in of any magnitude, that pre-application stage is really critical. Let's say it's an energy project in a permitted area, very complicated. And in many cases, standards not even set forth in the ordinance. In the case of mobile home parks or any dense type of subdivision, there's a lot of criterion that has to be looked at, not only above ground, but below ground. The subterranean, I would say, is as critical as what you see on the top. One of the weaknesses that I've discovered in the ordinance is in terms of infrastructure are cisterns and the need to be even more diligent on systems that are that cisterns that grow in size. Because I think in the future, you'll be seeing a lot more large scale cisterns. And the maintenance factor becomes more complicated as the size grows. So these are the kind of, pardon me, the details that we certainly would look at. I think there's great wisdom in looking at the construct of the current ordinance and seeing where areas might be embellished. I'm not sure that legal language is strong enough. I'm not an attorney, but I think that it could be reinforced. It needs some rebar to make it effective. And but those two sentences, I think, need to be embellished more, not just in the context of this portion of the ordinance, but also the transfer of properties happens in very unique, sometimes silent ways, and can be very complicated. So it's not just reviewing a homeowners association bylaws, which is in the purview of the planning board, but you need to go a step further as in the what if scenarios on transfers of properties, and it can get very complicated. And I think you're going to see a lot more trending away from leased properties to fee simple ownerships. So it is indeed complicated, but Sam and I are here to help and facilitate that conversation. I think you're doing a great job by looking at this, and I think that there probably should be some changes, not just to that section. Site plan review may need to be looked at in a more comprehensive way too, because the way your ordinance is constructed, virtually everything of any magnitude goes through site plan review. So I think that may be another section that we may want to look at in the future to make your jobs easier and to make mine more complicated in terms of reviewing the details up front. Nothing worse than having an unhappy applicant that's here for permitted use and finding out midstream he's got to go back to his civil engineer and spend another $30,000 because they weren't aware. So that's kind of my loop back, and I believe Sam had a couple points too that you have to mention.
I did just a couple more. Page 9, utilities, electrical utilities and telephone lines may be located above ground. Can we also, instead, could we require underground utilities for aesthetics and for reliability reasons? Is there any reason why we couldn't require that?
I like the word aesthetics. One of the complicating factors is how many lines are now strung on a pole. And not all parties, not all utility companies agree to put under or above. So it has to be almost in its purest state, starting in a new area where everything has a conduit, if that's the desire of the town and the desire of the planning board. The ideal situation, of course, is having all those line infrastructures underground. The complexity becomes the type of soils you're running through, if you're going through ledge, and all those other factors. So a good point, really good point. There are some communities, particularly in village planning, that seek to at least take a portion of the community to take those visual distractions away and put them underground. It's costly. actually very costly because you're not dealing with one party, you're dealing with multiple parties.
Yeah, it has to be done all, it has to be planned all at once. for
Yeah.
Every conduit for the electrical, the telecommunications,
Absolutely.
et cetera.
Yeah, with a lot of dig safe ribbons.
But if it's planned that way,
So it's planned that way from the
Oh.
beginning. There are actually communities, it's not a new concept. Reston, Columbia, all those bigger pre-planned developments, put everything underground.
Well, to put into context, we've been through the last couple of years, you know, you have 100 years worth of ordinances that have built up over time. And we've been working with North Star to clarify language and have consistency of languages across ordinances. And that has been a long process and, you know, and but an important process. And you know, and we've chosen to focus the last year or so on the conservation subdivision based upon community feedback of concern that that specific area of the ordinance needed a look at. And, you know, and we can go, once we move back past this phase, if the town votes for it, we can focus on work with the planning director and with the select board to prioritize what is kind of the next phases of review. And so these are all like good in the weeds stuff, but like tonight, we're not going to change any change any ordinances tonight, but we can make note of things we want to look at the future. And, you know, with the conservation subdivision, we tried to put it in the framework of what was the comprehensive plan. And, you know, and there's definitely potentially, you know, tensions in taking aspects of the plan and turn them into reality. You know, one aspect of the plan may talk about rural character or even aesthetics, and then you have another aspect of the plan talking about affordability of housing. And so, as he said, it may look nice if all the power lines were underground, but that's a cost. And are you hurting affordable housing doing that? And that's conversations we can have in the future, and I'm sure we will have. But it can be a long process and sometimes frustrated, but also ultimately, I think it's been a rewarding process for me, and I hope that the public, as they engage more through these great opportunities of both coming in person and watching online, they'll engage more with the planning board and share their thoughts with us as well as the select board.
So I agree, Orion, and the points you're bringing up that's the whole reason we're going over this. Is not, we shouldn't be looking at like, we need to change this because, as Orion said, we just went through that process and it's long, it's arduous, it takes time. We should be looking at, these are potential faults or pitfalls, and if and when somebody comes before us, we need to make sure that we're aware of these potential pitfalls. And as a planning board, this is how we want to approach it, or this is how we want the town planner to approach it. And so that's what we're kind of looking at. So your points are well taken, that we need to be sure when and if and when we address where the parking is. Can they put the electrical underground? Is that a possibility? There's some wiggle room there for sure. Sam, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think this is a good discussion to be potentially for next year's ordinance work plan. I think, yes, to reiterate what Tom said, making sure the standards are consistent with site plan and subdivision, and there's no loopholes there. I think the only thing I flagged when I was going through was on page 66. So when it talks about dead end roads, under D, dead end roads or cul-de-sac shall have a maximum length of 600 feet. So currently the ordinance doesn't have standards for cul-de-sacs. That was discussed with conservation subdivisions. So if that passes, then there will be standards, but currently there aren't any. So that's inconsistent with the way the ordinance currently is.
Sam, thanks for bringing out the cul-de-sac lack of design standards. As projects grow in scale, hammerheads are ineffective. Cul-de-sacs work when designed properly. But in worst case scenarios, and I always like to look at any scale of development, what happens in the worst type of event? Fire coming down from Bradbury, heading straight for the village, or how do we deal with those things? And so I think this is the perfect time for us to be creative in our planning, the perfect opportunity to really maybe take some time this winter and look at all the things that you put on the table and see if in fact there are ways of either embellishing the ordinance or cleaning it up to the point where it's effective and it's enforceable. Because I think that's the other issue, that if we get too hazy-eyed, it makes it difficult to enforce. And enforcements, and that's why I'm very keen on looking at cisterns, knowing that cisterns in the future, that is your future, and large-scale ones. And so the design of them, the location of them, the accessibility, the maintenance factors, the cost factors.
Why do you say cisterns in the future? Are you talking about potential for water issues, or just that bigger projects require more
yeah.
cisterns and we expect to see bigger projects?
Currently, your public water is on a 3-inch main with a 20 GPM. So 20 gallons per minute will only take care of a certain number of uses, but it certainly won't take care of fire suppression in a worst case scenario.
I mean, our ordinances, as far as I understand, there's nothing in our ordinances when people want to do development, according to my understanding, they're responsible for their water and sewer. Like, there's no guarantee that they would have access to public water and impose that cost on the town, right?
Well, public water in reality will be limited to the village area.
Yeah, I think
All
that's
the-
by design.
Yes, by design, all of the peripheral edges of town will be on certainly private systems.
This ordinance, Sam, this ordinance doesn't specifically mention cisterns, but I assume that falls under the subdivision ordinance that they would have to follow that same.
So just listening to the recommendations, I think either the next meeting or the January meeting, we should make a list of them, as you mentioned, prioritize what we need to work on. I think, LD 2003 is probably number one.
I had a quick question about the road thing, just to clarify, because we talked about this is 600-foot road limit for mobile, right? And we tweaked that for the major subdivision, but just because we changed that for the major subdivision doesn't mean that change applies to the mobile home. Just want to clarify that aspect of it. Is that,
It's just a dead end road. So like, can they have more road? And then these are just the dead end parts though for the 600?
well, private roads, I think we said they can only be, 600 feet long if they're a dead end. And so, yeah,
It may be helpful for, there's been a lot of different conversation tonight. It may be real helpful for the board to determine first if it wants to take a rifle approach or a shotgun approach. Taking a shotgun approach sometimes doesn't get the work done except over a long period of time. So I would, if I may, I'd suggest that you kind of create your highest priorities that you'd like to tackle, whether it be dealing with infrastructure, road design, the consideration of at least having the design for a cul-de-sac. Fairly easy to produce that because it's just a technical design, not terribly complicated. And most of those cul-de-sacs are designed so that you have the proper turning radii. Turning radius is critical. So what I always do is take the longest fire apparatus, and that's your turning radii. So, but there's creative ways of creating cul-de-sacs. There's disastrous ways of creating them, but it's not terribly complicated. That could be achieved very easily with just a couple board meetings.
Did we have any more comments about specifically the mobile home ordinance or questions? Bill, did you have any more concerns?
Maybe it's already code requirement.
Yeah.
Maybe situated so you're more solar.
Yeah, right. And again, those are conversations that we could have at the very early stage. That's the whole idea of that first meeting, either with a conservation subdivision or something like this. In the early stages, can't force them to do it, but we can have a conversation with them about what we might like to see. But yeah.
I think not that we want to use the word force, but do an ordinance, you kind of can very strongly recommend that they put a 200 amp service or put underground utilities in. Whether we should, that's up for debate, of course.
Yeah, right. And so that would be like, if we're gonna rewrite the ordinance, that's something definitely that we could talk about putting in. But right now we're working within the constraints of the ordinance, right, as it's written. But it's not to say that we can't have that conversation prior to a new ordinance being written, that you can't have that conversation with a landowner. We just can't force them to do it. Anybody else? I wasn't really planning on, we were just talking a little bit about future projects. I wasn't planning on talking about anything we had for the future. I'd leave that for Matt as the interim chair. And I think he'll talk with the select board about what our priorities now are after we've gotten the conservation subdivision ordinance written. And we'll take a breath, I think.
I've been talking to some potential applicants, correct? But there's nothing that's ready for us.
Not even a pre-application for a series of conversations. So I'm prepared. Step by step.
Yep.
You know, everybody needs a good mantra. Mine is shoot for the superlative process. Less than superlative. Whatever we need to do, be creative, but still have some legal muscle. That's important. It's important. It's a step by step. No one ever said zoning ordinance is gonna be easy.
That's for sure.
They're tough monsters.
Well, in terms of future agenda items, I haven't started to look at we have a policy of a process. It's on the website, and then all those checklists. It may be premature to do that before the ordinance is actually passed, but is on my to-do list.
Okay. So the next question, with nothing forthcoming for the month of December, and with the public hearings, do we need to have a meeting in December?
I don't think I'll know until the deadline, which is actually for new projects is now. So there's nothing, we don't have anything, unless there's old business, we wouldn't need to have a meeting.
And we don't have any old business
at this
right
moment.
at this moment.
I would say don't take it off your calendar, but be hopeful that we
Go ahead, Becky.
We received a second real estate request form that I just sent out yesterday. So you probably are going to want to convene in December.
We're handling it tonight.
Oh, are you doing both of them? Okay, so you're doing, never mind then. Okay, I thought you were just addressing the first one. So perfect. The next one isn't due until January, but I just wanted to make sure that you had kept that meeting if you weren't discussing it. Sorry.
They're the same person, though.
Yes.
So we'll plan on having the meeting, but depending on what comes up, we may not need to. Is that fair? Any other comments other than?
Just one little one. Yeah, prior to the public hearings, it wouldn't hurt certainly for me, maybe others, to try to anticipate what questions might come up, like look at it as a resident that you were never part of this committee or this, the board, and actually try to say, all right, what do they mean by this? So we don't, anticipate what questions they might have, especially on the presentation as well.
Ryan, when you presented at town meeting, did you get much feedback?
It was more of a presentation, not a Q&A, so
Yeah.
there wasn't questions, but I think we have a good understanding of kind of what concerns people have, and that the presentation does a good job at addressing those concerns. I think the thing that we make it clear is that, and I think the most concern people have is like, is this change going to have, lead to more housing? And the answer to that is no, that we tried to structure this updated ordinance in a way that the same number of units you could build before, you can build now, but under the new ordinance, the idea is that they're built in a better way and there's more, of a visual buffer and there's more open space preserved. And while the conservation subdivision ordinance may not be perfect, the intent is that it's an improvement over what we had with the major subdivision ordinance. And I think if we make that point clear and people look at it that lens, I think a majority of people will see that it is an improvement and it is aligned with the goals of the comprehensive plan, which is what we were trying to follow in its development.
As a relatively, you're new and kind of an outsider, do you have any, we've been buried in it for months. Yeah.
Great job.
Well, that's music to my ears, Bill. Thank you.
If that's all that we have, I propose that we adjourn. I second. All in favor? All right.